להודות לשם אדוני, להודות לשם אדוני. להודות לשם אדוני, להודות לשם אדוני, להודות לשם אדוני.
Even though we've cried, we've never been more alive. Am Yisrael Echad, and we ain't going nowhere, going nowhere. Ain't nobody crushing us, ain't nobody touching us. They may think they're winning, but they're strengthening our spirit, cause we're a closer family. Even after tragedy, they was hoping we just break down. It ain't happening. Did you really think you're gonna come at the chosen ones? Everybody came and gone, we the only ones who still around, and we're feeling super proud. I've been hearing lots of Am Yisrael guys around town. Okay, you got all the media in your corner, cool. We got the creator in our corner, ooh. Now you all see why we different, great. Could you leave us alone for a minute? Thanks. Jewish people, keep your head high. Don't you let nobody ever try to take your pride. Wear that crown and wear it proud. We still here now, cause we ain't going nowhere. I pay any mind to my haters. I just put my faith in He who made us. Now take a close look at my people. We use our light to fight the evil. We're beautiful and strong and we've been knocked down, but not a single time have they seen us drop the crown. And I'm just so proud of my nation. Every time I think about it, I'm like, man, it's amazing. Friends come and go, but families forever. We've been through it all, but we still all together. And those who were against us, we gon' never forget you. To those who stood by us, we gon' always remember. Keep shining, keep grinding, keeping the faith. I know it's hard, but I wouldn't have it any other way. We at the finish line, so hold on tight and don't you ever forget.
Hello, everyone. This is Jeffery Giesener from the Jewish Culture and Holocaust Remembrance 10-7 group. Thank you for coming. We are admitting people as we speak. Don't we have a nice audience today? I want to welcome you all, my friends and my new friends who are here for the first time. I want to also introduce you to Anna Fodorova. Please raise your hand, Anna, so they know you're here. Also, Michael Ruskin and Louise Fein, who are going to be our presenters, along with some terrific music today. We're going to just put some other music on, wait for a few more people to come in, and then we'll get started.
שאלו שלום ירושלים, ישליו אוהבייך, יהי שלום בחילך, שלווה בארמונותייך. שלום
the peace of Jerusalem. Those who love you will be blessed. Peace be within your walls, and blessing to those who reign. Oh, pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Those who love you will be blessed. Oh, peace be within your walls, and blessing to those who reign.
Shalom, 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 לשם אדוני, להודות לשם אדוני, להודות לשם אדוני. להודות לשם אדוני, להודות לשם אדוני, להודות לשם אדוני.
Okay, and we're going to get started. Thank you for being here. We appreciate you. Those of you who are not on, you have your cameras off. We cannot see you. The program doesn't allow you to be seen. So if you want to be seen, we'd appreciate it. Our speakers would certainly love to see you. So put your cameras back on so we can say hello to you, and that would be great. I want to start off by introducing myself. I'm Jeffery Giesener, founder of the Jewish Culture and Holocaust Remembrance 10-7 group. Actually, in October, we made an amendment to the group's name to include 10-7 and its remembrance, even though we have been challenged, all of us, of what we're seeing every day. So the group has been expanded to include remembrance over 10-7. You'll see that today and some of the music that I'll be playing between our presenters. I started the group in May of 2021, and if you can believe it or not, through all of our digital platforms, we now have a community over 20,000 international members, and we do these programs several times a month now. I'm very proud to be offered it. We've done over 146 programs so far in our catalog and library. I've made some of the best friends I've ever could make through our virtual connections. Some of them are with me here today, Eva and Mark, who've been just religious comers to the program. And I'm glad you're here. And I'm glad those who are hearing us for the first time, and I see that Gabby is here. So hello, Gabby. I know you're starting to make your presence known on all these programs. I started the program because I wanted to honor my parents, and everything I have done for the group has been dedicated to honor my survivor parents who never spoke to me, or my sister, who's 4 years older than I am, about their Holocaust. And I never thought when I started this group, I really thought I would have 50 members who would help me identify a pathway for my parents. Well, it certainly has done that, and so much more. And it's done that well for all of the people who participate in our programs. It's being recorded, and it'll also stream along with all the other programs on all the media platforms. We have 3 presenters here today. We have Anna Fodorova, if you can raise your hand. We have Michael Ruskin, and we have Louise Fein. All will be presenting their Holocaust memoirs to whatever degree to us today. And we're going to start with an introduction of herself with Anna. So Anna, you can take the mic and start your presentation. Thank you for being here and supporting the group.
Thank you. I'm sitting in London, and I thought I will present myself about who I am. I will read a short, sort of like an article that I wrote for a small magazine, London magazine, that's called Second Generation. It's a publication of Second Generation of Holocaust survivors. And my book is called In the Blood. This is the book. It's a novel. It's not it's not a memoir. It's a novel, but it's kind of, maybe these days it's called autofiction. It is inspired by very much by the history of my family. Yes, except it's a novel and it's a fiction and it's got a plot and it's got surprise and it's got tension and so on. So I will read a little bit now about myself. So about my history, how I came to be in London. So in 1968, I was a student at the Prague College of Applied Art, and it was an exciting time. There was a belief that the reform of the totalitarian regimes in Eastern Europe was possible, and for the first time we were allowed to travel and work in the West. When a fellow student showed me the Butlins holiday camp brochure picturing a palm tree against the sea horizon, I imagined myself as a barmaid somewhere in the Bognor Riviera. And though I didn't speak a word of English, I felt I had what it took. I was young, had long hair, wore a miniskirt, and hoped to purchase the stick-on eyelashes as soon as I got paid. On arrival in Bognor Regis, the first thing I noticed was that Butlins was surrounded by a tall barbed wire fence and powerful searchlights. I was issued with a uniform and a card with a mugshot of me holding a number that I had to show every time I left or entered the perimeters of the camp. I slept on a bunk bed, and at night I watched the security guards walk around with their scary dogs. At that time, being a Jew in Czechoslovakia seemed like a dangerous secret, which may be why, bizarre though my experience in Butlins was, I remained blind to its obvious echoes from the past. I left Butlins hoping to hitchhike around England, but then the Russian invaded my country and I became an immigrant. Years later, when I started to train as a psychotherapist, I gathered the courage to talk about what it felt like to be born into a family where everyone except my parents had been killed in the Shoah. Around that time, I had also come across the term the second generation of the Holocaust survivors. When I mentioned it to my mother, she looked at me surprised. What second generation? You were born after it was all over. Nothing happened to you. I became puzzled by that nothing. Nothing, the nothing that we carry inside us and that formed us in our childhood. I attended conferences about the transgenerational transmission of trauma, where, to my amazement, I met people who, though coming from different countries and circumstances, had similar experiences of silence and of denial, of guilt. I published a paper about it in Psychodynamic Practice journal called Mourning by Proxy, Notes on Conference, Empty Graves and Silence.
Anna, can you bring your microphone a little bit closer to your mouth?
You can't hear me?
That's much better. That's much better.
Anyway, so my first novel, I wrote a novel called The Training Patient. And this was about a trainee therapist whose patient believes that her father, it was about a training therapist. My second novel, which is In the Blood, explores the impact of history on the personal lives of 3 generations, a mother, a daughter, and a granddaughter. My main protagonist, Agata, is the only child of Czech Jewish parents. She grew up in Prague believing that all her relatives perished in the Holocaust. Now living in London with her English husband and their daughter, Agata discovers astonishing news. Not everyone died. Like Agata, I too believed that all my relatives were dead. When to my incredulity, I found out that it wasn't quite so, I tried to understand why this was kept a secret. What was there to hide? Eventually, I realized that what the secret was, a trauma. But in my novel, Agata sets out to discover the truth. Through her subsequent search for her surviving relative, she meets a young academic, the grandson of a Nazi, working on his thesis about transmission of trauma to the descendants of perpetrators as well as victims. They form an odd relationship. I'm sorry, maybe you didn't hear the first part?
No, we did. You did. You're fine.
You did, okay. So it's a little bit about
Just put
my
the mic-
history.
Put the mic up.
It's a, sorry. It's a little bit about my history, then how, when I started to write about the transgenerational transmission of trauma, when I started to discover what that was, which is like over 20 years ago, and when I realized that it was something to do with me, that I carried that trauma, and that, you know, very, very it was very interesting when my mother said, nothing happened to you. And I think that's very much an experience from what I was hearing from other people of my generation, because nothing happened to us. We were born after the war. But a lot of things happened to us. You know, we don't have, I didn't have any family. So I then realized that I rather write about it in fiction, rather than like academic journals or, you know, psychoanalytic understandings. So I thought I will use this as a part of fiction, and hence the book In the Blood. And in this book, it's Agatha, who is the main protagonist, who discovers that she has relatives. And there is actually a secret that eventually we discover why it was that this was kept a secret. But she also forms this strange relationship with someone who is a descendant of perpetrators of a Nazi. And they have this strange understanding that they both, in a way, suffer the trauma of the second, in his case, third generation. So I'm now going to read a little extract from the book, which is about when Agatha's mother in the book is a musicologist. She writes about music, and she was interviewed by a journalist for the BBC about a certain thing about Czechoslovakia. And this interview was transmitted in England. I also want to say that this book is happening in 1988, 1989, 1990. And the story is happening against the background of change in Eastern Europe. The Berlin Wall falls, and all the communist regimes crash. And in a way, it's kind of, and the truth, as it were, can be now told about, you know, the dogma stops to be something we can't question, the communist dogma, the dogma of totalitarian regimes. And it's a little bit similar in Agatha's family, where the dogma, where things were not possible to talk about, there was a taboo. And taboo, like you said, Jeff, the taboo was that the war and the Holocaust and nothing like that was very much talked about. But as I know as a psychotherapist, it's very important to talk about these things. So this interview was on BBC in my book, the television, and I will read a little bit of what happens after the interview when the mother, Agatha's mother, who lives in Prague, but she's visiting in London. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. I have to change glasses. I'm sorry. Different glasses.
Just try to keep that mic near you.
Yeah. Hang on, I just want to close this door here. Yeah. Okay, so because in the book, it's also about the difficulty of these people, actually, because in the book, Agatha starts to find the relatives, but against all her beliefs and hopes, where we read about, happy family meetings and growing family of relatives and everybody loves each other. To Agatha, that doesn't happen. In a way, the reluctance about making these connections continues with her relatives and with her mother and with her family, in fact, because she alienates her family. She has a daughter and a husband, and her pursuit, which she becomes obsessed by looking for people, trying to find people, and that in a way threatens her own family, it becomes unbearable for them. So that's what happens. The moment she opens the front door, she hears her mother shouting, "I just put the eye drops in, someone get the phone." Agatha picks it up just in time. "Hello, this is Nigel Hartley from the BBC. I'm calling from Bonn. Sorry to disturb you, but I understand that Doris Weiss is staying with you." "Yes, she is. Mama, it's the BBC man from Bonn." "Hello, Nigel, hello." Her mother is already pulling the receiver from Agatha's hand. "How are you, Nigel?" Her genuine warmth with casual acquaintances attaches them to her for life. "Oh, that was my daughter, Agatha. You met her in Prague, remember? We watched that your brilliant reportage. It was unbelievable. And sorry, Nigel, who saw the program? Who phoned you?" "Stolov? No, I don't know anyone of that name." "Aha, her married name. I see. She keeps nodding. "Yes, Rene Krauss. Yes, of course. She's my cousin. On my mother's side." Her mother makes an impatient face at Agatha, and her voice begins to chip. Agatha feels as if air is being sucked out of her chest. Mama's cousin on her mother's side? The utter novelty of those words. "Just a minute, Nigel." Mother gropes around. I have to find. "Do you want me to write something down for you?" Agatha whispers, handing her a biro. Mama waves her off. "She's my cousin," her mother said. "My cousin on my mother's side." Crouching on the sofa, clutching the phone, her mother listens to the voice from Bonn, passing her the news about her lost family. Her expression betrays nothing. Fearing her own reaction, Agatha quietly takes herself to the kitchen. And only after she closes the door behind her, she allows herself to succumb to an onslaught of sobs. It is true then. It is true. Someone, a relative, is alive. When her mother eventually comes in, she thrusts a scrap of paper into Agatha's face. "Here," she hisses, her bloodshot eyes glaring at her. "You wanted a family, so now you have one. Happy?" An out-of-London phone number. Next to it, a name scrawled in shaky letters. Rene Stolov. "Who is she?" "You heard? My cousin, my aunt's daughter. Not the one who married the man with the jewelry shop. The other one, the one who was psychiatrist in Berlin. She saw me on TV and phoned the BBC." "A doctor in Berlin? I don't think I ever heard of her." "No, that was her mother, Aunt Gisela Krauss. Her daughter, my cousin Rene, she came here in the kinder transport after their family escaped from Berlin to Prague. They stayed in our flat. Her parents ended up in Auschwitz, like everyone else in that flat." Gisela Krauss, the name on the Auschwitz death certificate. "But Mama, I was under the impression that they had all died in concentration camps." "You and your impressions. The problem with you is that you don't listen." "But," Agatha can't stop herself, "if you knew she came here, haven't you ever tried to find her?" "I'm telling you, She was only a child. I don't know what happened to her. I hardly knew her. Her mother almost yells at her. She grabs a glass, yet can't manage to turn the tap to pour herself some water. Her hands trembling too much. Okay, Mama. Agatha extracts the glass from her fingers and fills it up. It all happened a bit fast. Don't worry, everything is going to be all right. Who's worried? Her mother snarls. Of course you're not worried. There is no problem. Nothing two of us can handle. Her mother passes her a look of contempt. What you blubbering about? Your brain's gone soft? Ignoring her, Agatha suggests that she would make them something warm to drink, a little something to eat. Joy rushes through her with such force, such ferocity, that she can't stop grinning. Yes, they should have tea, and crackers, and cheese, maybe some marmalade. And then let's call her. Shall we, Mama? She bends down to kiss Mama's cheek. You call her, Mama gawks. Right. So, as I said, they are all very reluctant. Now, maybe I will read another little part, which is that when this Agatha went to a lecture about transmission of trauma, she met there, I'll read about, is that okay to read some more, or do you want
Sure.
to?
Just make sure you use your microphone.
Oh, okay. All right, then I will read about Agatha going to a conference or to a talk about transmission of trauma. The hall is packed, mostly by people of her mother's generation, mostly women. They make an odd gathering, lined faces caked with makeup, hair dyed bright, gnarled bodies in garish clothes, as if to say, look at us, we have no precedent how to age. We've been robbed of the chance to see those before us growing old graciously. So what the hell? The main speaker, a psychoanalyst, sits on the podium in a cherry red jacket. She's in her late 70s, as are most of the audience. Agatha has never heard of this woman, but the moment she opens her mouth, Agatha knows she's talking to her. Transfixed, she soaks in every word. Disavowal, shared silence, delayed mourning. During the question time, an elderly lady in a tailored suit raises her hand. I have a question, she announces. I have been asking it for nearly 50 years. I've read all the literature, even went to Germany to find an answer. What is the question? Someone calls. Several people laugh. Why did they do it? The woman demands quietly. The audience shifts. Why? Unfortunately, there is always someone lowering the quality of the discussion, whispers the young, smoothly shaven man with round glasses sitting next to Agatha. There are plenty of books on the subject, he calls out. The audience joins him. Next question. I've looked. The woman stands her ground. She has read all the books she could find, and not a single one explained this hatred to her. Not one. At the very back, an old man gets up. I'm an Auschwitz survivor. The audience turns to him. My granddaughter is 12. The man's Adam apple slides nervously up and down. What should I tell her to prevent her anguish? Agata's neighbor purses his lips. Please, he groans, this time only for her ears. Isn't this supposed to be about the effect on the second generation? His English is impeccable in the manner post-war Germans learned in their newly built schools. My doctoral dissertation is about the intergenerational transfer of trauma, he explains. But the second generation seems to be underrepresented here tonight. How do we protect our grandchildren? The old man's apple threatens to rip his skin, sharp as the rolling R's of his adopted tongue. Talk to them, the psychoanalyst suggests. That's the only way. Then someone shouts, what's the point of being Jewish anyway? And someone else, perhaps to lighten the atmosphere, shares a joke about a Jewish refugee who lost everything except his accent, which brings up a few chuckles, but mostly a wave of protest. And to her surprise, Agata feels at home among those ancient faces. They remind her of her childhood, of hearing her parents and their friends arguing about politics around the kitchen table long into the night. Later, she learned that each of them had returned from wartime exile or from the camps, uncles and aunts to their children, siblings of ghosts. She takes out her notepad, a small book with hard red edges she bought on Bobby Greengrass's advice to record her thoughts. Are you also an academic? Her neighbor asks. She shakes her head. You must be the second generation then, correct? She nods and instantly feels exposed. Super! Why don't you tell them what it's like? Here, excuse me? The young man waves his arm, and before Agata can protest, a microphone is thrust into her hand and everyone turns in her direction. I was born in Prague, she raises slowly, frantically trying to come up with what to say next. The audience hums with approval. She even hears someone call, so was I, and someone else, the golden Praha. Everything swells around her. The blood rushes to her temples and she wonders if she will faint. She has never stood in front of a crowd, never felt so many eyes on her. So that makes me a Czech. At least that's what I thought, she goes on. But when I was about 10, a boy at school shouted in my ear, you shitty Jew. You see, my parents forgot to tell me that's what we were. Quite a few laughs, not derisive, more in sympathy. She takes them as a prompt. I can't remember why he said it, although I knew it was an insult. But why pick on me? I went home and asked my parents. Even before I finished, I felt their fear. It sat with us in the room. My parents, they never told me about menorah or Passover, nothing like that. But in that moment, I understood that I now belonged to that heap of scary matchstick people I saw once in a book. I was horrified. Please, let me not be it. I beg my parents, please. She tells the sea of ancient faces, the first time she has ever spoken of this to anyone. The hall is now filled with uneasy silence. Only her neighbor, his glasses glinting with excitement, gives her a little salute. I'll read a little bit longer.
You have about 5 minutes.
Oh, well, then I will stop now.
Okay,
Okay.
I'm sorry, say it again. You have to put your microphone. We can't hear you.
I will stop now, I said.
Okay,
I wanted to read about this young man's German's, his Austrian
well,
trauma.
go ahead. Give us 5 minutes.
Well, they go to a pub and they drink, and he knows how to drink because he comes from where the wine is made in Danube region, so he drinks. And maybe I'll just read this. And they talk about trauma, and he calls what Agata feels a trauma. She never had this before about trauma. And then he talks about himself, and he says, it doesn't take long before Klaus offers a trauma of his own. This dates back to the night when he, maybe 5 at the time, witnessed his grandpa, his oppa, breathe his last under a thick eider down. His mum, his mother, his mutti, his mother, closed oppa's eyes, then fastened a handkerchief around her head, grabbed a pickaxe, and hurried out to grandpa's vegetable garden, where, in the cold twilight, Klaus saw her digging everything out. Every carrot, every onion, every leek, every rote beete, every Weißkraut, every Rotkraut, every imaginable kraut, till there was nothing left but raw black soil that she turned over twice. Komisch, isn't it? Klaus chortles, squinting through his specs. And Agatha, unsure what all this is about going, laughs and clinks glasses with him. From the window, Klaus watched his mutti chuck everything on a pile, douse it with petrol, and light a match. The flames burst out like fireworks. There was a sound of popping and a thick smoke, although young Klaus knew better than to shout hooray. Already he understood that this had nothing to do with the vegetables. This act of destruction had to do with something else, something much larger than the biggest turnip.
Well, thank you, Anna. I want to let you know that our audience appreciates the topic of intergenerational survivor trauma. Personally, I've experienced it since the 5th grade myself, and there are many who are with us today. And I want to also mention that if you don't have your camera on, we can't see you. So we would love for you to put your camera on so that you can be part of the visuals so our audience and our presenters can see you. Every October, our group puts together a program called Into the Light, which is for intergenerational survivor trauma. It's one of the most well-attended programs that we have every year. And I do that with a friend of mine, Dana Schrager, who's a psychologist. So thank you for bringing this topic back to us. We look forward to, why don't you hold up your book one more time so people can see it. And then Michael, just so you know, I'm going to break for a second to give everyone a chance to kind of absorb what we just heard. And I'll go to some.
It's on the Amazon.
You're going to be next then, Michael. So hold on a second.
I'm just saying it's on the Amazon.
אדוני אלוהים אשר בעולם בטרם כל יציר נברא ויעז לעשות חפצו כל אזי מלך שמו
Okay, we're going to now go to Michael Ruskin, who is going to share his book, The Vow. So Michael, why don't you unmute yourself and make sure that you tell us a little about yourself and your background, and tell us about your book.
Okay. Hello, everybody. My name is Michael Ruskin. Before I get started, Jeffrey, I have to share the screen right now. If I want to get
Okay.
Yes. Okay, hold on. Okay.
There you go. You're fine. Just go ahead.
Okay. As I said, my name is Michael Ruskin. I am from Atlanta, Georgia. Really, I'm from Alpharetta, which is just outside of Atlanta. And I'm here to tell you about a story of two people I consider my greatest teachers. They were my parents, David and Dora Ruskin, from the country of Lithuania. The story is based on a true facts that I found over research I've done. My parents were Holocaust survivors. My father was in the camp of Dachau, and my mother was in Stutthof, which is a camp in northern Poland. Now, let me start by saying that I really didn't know my parents until they were gone. And that was very difficult for me to grasp. But what happened was after they had passed, it took me a number of years to piece their lives together. I ended up getting a researcher from England who helped me research the history of Lithuania. I spoke to my cousin in Tel Aviv, Israel, to give me more information about my parents, contacted the Holocaust Museum in Washington, as well as Yad Vashem World Remembrance Center in Jerusalem. So I got a lot of information from those sources. But the one thing that was missing was the information I received in 1993 when my father passed away in Miami Beach, Florida, September 27th, 1993. I was living in New York or New Jersey. My brother was living in New York. And by the way, I want you to know that I am originally from Brooklyn, New York. And frankly, you could say that I could have been born on the Atlantic Ocean because my mother had me within just a couple of weeks after I landed in Ellis Island. So you can say that I was born under the Statue of Liberty, more or less. We moved to Borough Park, Brooklyn, where I lived there for about 5-6 years. Then we moved to New Jersey, where I lived for my earlier years. I know I'm backing up a little bit. I ended up going to Kent State University in Ohio. And then I went on to, my degree was in psychology and political science, and I went on to doing consulting work in human resources. In addition to my book, I don't know, can you see me? I'm not even sure.
Yeah, we can see you.
Okay, so, because I don't see me, so.
I know. Just put your book up there. It's fine.
Here you go. Anyway, in addition to my book, The Vow, A Love Story in the Holocaust, I also have another company called lifetimestories.net, where we write people's memoirs. And I'm also involved with helping the elderly with some Seniors for Seniors, where I help seniors get through their lives in their wherever they're, whether in the home or in facilities. So I'm very, very busy. Anyway, getting back to what I was saying. So when I found these documents, it happened in '93, and after my father passed, my brother and I decided we were going to put the condominium that my father was living in. My mother already had Alzheimer's, so she was in a nursing home. And so at the end of September, early October, I went over to the condominium in the South Beach, and I started straightening up their condominium for the real estate people to come aboard, to take a look at the unit and then put it on the market. So here I'm cleaning up and taking some clothes out and arranging the unit. And I got to my father's night table. And as I was cleaning out his night table, I went into his lower drawer and I found a manila folder. And in that folder was documents from attorneys and doctors that were taking testimony from my parents back in 1964 for reparations for the loss of their daughter, my sister, at the age of 3.5, as well as my grandparents, my aunts and uncles, my mother's side of the family, my father's side of the family. These documents really opened my eyes to things I never knew and they never spoke about until I read those documents. And those documents, which is now at the Holocaust Museum Library, as well as in my book, became the nucleus of the book and my major reason why I actually wrote the book years later. So, I shared the information with my brother. He seemed a little bit, my brother's pretty stoic, and he was just shaking his head and just went on with his life, while I ended up taking those documents and bringing them back. At that point, I was living up in New Jersey. And a few years later, I mean, really it was many years later, where I actually started writing the book in 2017. And it took me, at that point, I really didn't give it much thought before then. I just kind of dismissed it as being something that happened in the past. And frankly, I don't know what really was the impetus, other than the fact that my brother passed away in 2008, which made me the last surviving member of my family. And I realized if I didn't tell their story, my parents' story, their lives would have just kind of passed into the history books, and they wouldn't have known very much about my parents, who lived extraordinary lives, as I'm going to go in with you in just a moment. Anyway, so after I ended up assembling these people that were helping me with the book, I started getting ready to write their manuscript based on the information I received from my sources, as well as the documents that I found. So in September of 2017, I'm sitting at my computer and I start typing away on my manuscript. And all of a sudden, I felt an energy in the room, and I can't explain it. It felt like there was someone in the room. It was an energy I never felt before. And I realized within, I would say 15, 20 minutes, there was an energy that was entering my head while I was starting to write the manuscript. And that energy turned out to be my mother and father. I was typing away words and thoughts that weren't mine. All I did was, it was almost as if my fingers had a mind of their own. And as I was racing across the keyboard, my fingers was just flying across the keyboard, putting this information into the manuscript. Next morning, I'd wake up, I looked down on my computer, and I couldn't even remember that I wrote it. It was kind of unnerving, but after a while, as I got into the later chapters, I realized they were my parents. So, and I tell my audiences, I've been speaking now for a number of years, this is not my book, and this is not my story. This is their book, and this is their story, and I'm only here to speak for them. I'm almost like a messenger, a channeler between me and my parents. So as I was doing my research and I was typing away, I want to mention also that the book that I wrote is a book of contrasts between good and evil, between the light and the darkness, between hope and despair, and one man, Adolf Hitler, and what he destroyed in so many people's lives versus two people whose love and courage would not be denied. So, and I wanted to make clear to everyone who's listening, this is a spiritual book. This is a book where I believe that my parents, and I just want to preface this by saying, in the country of Lithuania, over 97% of the Jewish population were exterminated. I'm trying to get to my PowerPoint, so let me just see something here. Hold on. Okay, hold on.
Isn't this the first slide of your deck?
No, it is not.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah, you probably have to go to your computer and open it there.
okay.
There you go.
Hold on. There we go. Okay, we'll start over here. Sorry, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, so what you see here are all the countries in Europe, most of the countries in Europe. And if you look down, you will see Lithuania. And by the way, those numbers are not exact. They were more like 160,000 because a lot of the Polish Jews entered Lithuania as the Nazis were going across Germany. So there were more like 160,000 or so. But if you see on the right side, the percentage killed, 96.7%. When I saw these numbers, I realized that my parents, they were destined to tell the experiences of their lives, of what happened to them during the Holocaust. And yet their words were left unspoken. So now I took up the responsibility to carry their legacy and to let people know who these incredible people were, and also to actually use the book as a way of describing the Holocaust through my parents' eyes. So when I saw these numbers and I realized that both my mother and father survived, it made me, there was no question that they were what I call in my book, the miracle couple. These are the estimates of the number of the Jewish population killed in Europe. It was close to 58%. We're looking at a total of pre-war Jewish population of just under 10 million. The estimated killed were just over, I would just say over 5 million. These numbers were staggering, but you can't even wrap your head around these numbers because it's so extraordinarily large. The number of children perished during the Holocaust was 1.5 million. And I will tell you right now, when I wrote my chapter 6 on the death of the innocent, the hardest chapter for me to write was about the children. And to this day, it's very difficult for me even to go into explaining what happened. Here's a picture of my wonderful family. As I'm smiling here. My mother is on the far right. She has her hands on my grandfather's shoulders. My Aunt Sarah is on the left. All the people in this photograph, and by the way, this is not my entire family. I will preface this by saying my mother was one of 9 children. There were 6 girls and 3 boys. Out of the 9, only 3 lived. My Aunt Rivka ended up going to Finland before Germany invaded Lithuania. And Sarah on the left and my mother on the right were together through the entire experiences of going through the Kovna ghetto and into the concentration camp. Now, I want to give you a little bit of a backstory. This is a very interesting part of in my presentation. That little baby at the bottom, my cousin. I found this photograph in my parents' photo album. And when I saw this photo, when I first saw this photo, that little baby's face that my grandmother Chaya, by the way, my grandfather was Chaim Kext and my grandmother's Chaya. That little baby's face was actually crossed out with a lead pencil. So if we went back a couple years, I would have shown you this picture and you would not have been able to see the baby's face. And it was shocking when my graphic designer, who actually designed my book, realized by looking under a magnifying glass that that baby's face was penciled out. So she ended up getting a little bit of hand soap and put it on the baby's, on that picture of the baby's face, and that lead pencil actually came off the baby's face, and that's who you're seeing there now. My point is that no one could have done that except for my mother, and I believe that she actually penciled out that face because of her own daughter being taken from her when she was only 3 years old. That's the only logical conclusion I can come to, because no one else had that photo except for my parents. And I knew early on when I first saw that photo, there was no baby's face in that photo. It's a very interesting point that I wanted to bring up because that's how distraught my mother was over this terrific, tremendous experience of horror that she went through. Okay, moving on. This is a picture of my, not mine, but it was the housekeeper. My mother is on the far right. This was in 1930, 35, I think, and the other one was about 36, 37. On the left is Sarah. All the people in this photograph, except for my mom and my aunt, were exterminated during the Holocaust. You notice here in the photograph, no one is smiling. I think part of it, from what I've been told, is back then the photographer wanted to make sure nobody smiled. I guess it's because they wanted to take the right picture. I have no idea. But look at the photograph. You see that that iron circle that my cousin had with that little stick? They would roll that down the street in the 1930s. Anyway, getting back to my housekeeper, Norma, she was very well loved by my parents. And let me back up a second. My grandfather, Chaim Kext, had a farm, had about 75 acres of land. He raised crops. He had some wild stock. My mom and her siblings and brothers lived a close relationship with my family. They came from an extremely Orthodox background. And they were very well loved by the community. My father obviously studied Torah, and he did Torah classes with the community. He was very well liked by both the Gentiles and the Jews. My father, in 1935, 36, he was in the Lithuanian army, reserved. My father came from an entirely different background. My father came from a very poor background. My grandfather, Meyer, I'm named after him. They ended up running a haberdashery, a 2-story building, selling gloves, scarves, hats, belts, that kind of clothing to the locals. And they were from Kazan, Lithuania. My mother was from Mažeikiai. They lived about a couple hours apart. But my point is, there's a great contrast because my father's side of the family were very poor. My grandfather died at a very young age, and my dad and my aunt Rose ended up running the store with my grandmother before my father ended up moving to Kaunas to become an electrician for a construction company. While my mother, who graduated in 1937, this picture of my parents, in 1937, ended up going to a teacher's college in Kaunas. So my dad and my mom actually met through my Aunt Sarah when my dad moved into the apartment building just up the stairs from where my mom and my aunt were living at the time. So let me just back up and say they were courting for I think it was like 2 years. They got married in 1939. And Rose Miriam, my sister, was born in 1940 in Kaunas, Lithuania. And all along, this is now 1940, Hitler was already on the march. And I'm not going to go into a lot of history, but I will tell you that there was a non-aggression pact made between Hitler and Stalin in 1939, what was later called the Sphere of Influence. It was a secret pact made between the foreign ministers of both countries, where Germany was going to annex the western part of Europe, and Stalin and the communists were going to annex the eastern part of Europe. And they made a non-aggression pact, which made them understand that they were not going to invade each other's territory. Unfortunately, it didn't turn out that way. They made a pact that at the certain parallel in Poland, that the Germans were going to take over the western part of Poland, and Stalin and the Russians were going to take the eastern part. But that's not what Adolf Hitler had in mind. What he had in mind was to go across the country of Poland, go through Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, and go into Russia to take over the Russian territory. What he called I can't remember, there's a German word for giving the Germans more living space, Lieferschmalt or something, a word like that. Anyway, so the Germans arrived in 1941. This is a picture of the Germans marching, the Nazis marching. This is in Warsaw, Poland. I surmised it was very similar to what happened when they got into Lithuania. And by the way, many of these photos were given to me by Yad Vashem, as well as the Holocaust Museum. This is a picture of my uncles, Joseph and David. The gentleman in the middle actually was dating my mother for a very short period of time before she met my dad. Both of my uncles were in rabbinic college. I come from a long line of rabbinic scholars that go back into the 1800s. My grandfather and his father and his grandfathers were all rabbis. I unfortunately did not follow the same path, but it was an incredible experience to be writing this book, and also believing that it's very important that I follow the Jewish faith. Anyway, so these were my uncles, and of course they were killed during the war too. And I will tell you that many of my family were not killed by the Nazis per se. They were killed by the locals. And this many of the locals who ended up believing that many of them believed that the Jews were collaborating with the Russians. And this gets really complicated because what happened was when the Russians took over Lithuania, they sent a lot of the locals up to Siberia along with many Jews. They took over the factories, the businesses all through Lithuania. And many of the Lithuanians believed that when the Nazis arrived in Germany, that it was payback time for what the Jews, they believe, were collaborating with the Russians, which was never found. And so when the Russians were pushed back into the Soviet Union, the local Lithuanians killed tens of thousands of Jews, and many of them were told by the Germans to actually go into the homes and kill the Jews in those homes. So it was, I'll go into it in the book. It was like really a difficult piece to write. My grandparents on my mother's side and my family were killed by the locals in Mezhek, and it was a very difficult time. This is a picture of Lena, and I will tell you, and let me just back up because I'm going ahead of myself. When the Germans arrived in Lithuania, the way they got the Jews of that country to move into the ghetto was by telling them they were being displaced because of the horrors that were going on with the Lithuanian nationals, because they were killing so many Jews. So the German hierarchy came in, they brought in some of the senior members of the Jewish community, and they told them that they were going to put them in the what they call Slobodka, which is a very poor section of Lithuania. And they were going to displace them in this ghetto, which was housing about 9,000 people who were going to be displaced and replaced by the Jews of about 30 to 32,000. So now all of a sudden you've got 3 families living in an apartment, which was only built for maybe 1 family at that. So it was an extremely difficult time. They were ordered to wear Stars of David on both the back and front of their clothing. They were not allowed to go out of the ghetto. There was a lot of bartering going on between the fences between the Gentiles and the Jews. Black market came about. Parents, they didn't give them much foods, and the crowded caused them a lot of disease. And a lot of people died during that time in the ghetto. What distinguishes what happened in the Kovna ghetto is 2 things. One was the raids of the houses in the apartment buildings, where the Germans were invading the homes of these apartments and taking various clothing, jewelry, appliances, anything they can get a hold of, and they would take them and sell them on the black market, or they'd give them to their families. And this was, and I'm now getting back into the Lena situation. The last raid of the apartment buildings took place in 1944. It was the Kindernacht, and not a lot of people know about this. Again, my book is more focused on the ghetto, life in the ghetto, than it was in the concentration camps, although I give a lot of focus as well to the concentration camps. But the last raid of the house, the homes, or the apartments, were in 1944, where they went after the children. And this is also part of the documents I found in my father's condominium. My sister Rose was taken on on March 27th, 1944. And this little girl, Lena, who I found on the Yad Vashem website, she actually is the same age, and she died in the same place with 1,600 children, including my sister. And this was one of the most difficult chapters for me to write. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about what happened. I will tell you that they found my sister and my mother underneath the floor of their apartment. They were hiding there when my father actually dug what they call a spider hole underneath the floor, where they would go down when there were raids in the apartment buildings, and they would hide. And the day that my sister was taken, my father was on a work detail, and I will tell you to make sure that I didn't miss this. The main goal of the Nazis were to kill the Jews by working them to death. So they would have these work details. They would work 18-hour days, march back home, get up 2 hours later and go back and work. My dad worked in a aircraft plant doing various parts for the Nazis. So anyways, when my father was on work detail that day, my mom and my sister were in the apartment, and the raid took place where they were running up and down the stairs, taking children out of the apartments. The Germans actually ended up putting loudspeakers on their trucks and blasted the loudspeakers, so they were trying to drown out the screams of the parents as the children were actually taken away. And my sister was found with my mom underneath the floorboard when the Germans ended up hearing a murmur from underneath the floor, and I go into it in the book. It's also in the testimony. He hit one of the German guards, took the bottom of his rifle and was tapping on the floor, and he found both my mom and Rose underneath the floor. And then there was a struggle going on. I'm not going to go. It was very, very difficult for me to write this. But let me put it this way. My sister was literally taken out of the arms of my mom, and then my mom was hit in the head by the soldier, and she was knocked out cold. And later on, my father came home. The people next door put my mother back in the apartment, and then my father walked in and realized that Rose was gone. That was it. So they never saw them again. So what they did was they not only the children, but they took many to the extermination building. It was called Fort 9. It was a fort that the Russians had back in the 1800s. It was converted to a extermination building. And the building is still there. It's still in Lithuania. And so what they did with the children is they put them on the truck that was outside the apartment buildings, and they would roll them right into the extermination camp. And then the parents were screaming and yelling, and it was a horror show. So this went on in March. 3 months later, when they were going to liquidate the ghetto because the Allies were getting close to liberating Lithuania and then into Poland, they decided that they were going to move the remaining Jews of the Kovna ghetto into another camp, which was going to be further away than Lithuania, to get them closer to Germany, just to capture some of this other information about the children. This is Abraham and Emmanuel. These are two children who also passed in the Kovna ghetto. Unless you're doing a lot of research, there are people that get into talking about the Kovna ghetto. Some authors have, but I did extensive research in this area, and the stories that I read was just horrible. This is Hannah. She actually lived. The parents ended up going to some kind of farm and lived out there, and they were hidden for a long time, and they survived. Again, now I talked about the selection. Where they would have the selection process in the city square, where they would line up people for hours and then examined by the SS. If you were well enough and young enough, you were going to the right to work. If you're too sickly or too old, you would go to the left and end up in the extermination camp. My mom, my dad, and my aunt were in these lines numerous times. And miraculously, they survived. One story my mom did tell me was when they were in line, and believe me, you're standing in line for hours, and and every 2 minutes, you're getting closer and closer to being examined by the SS. My mother told me that she would turn to my aunt and tell her to pinch her cheeks, give her more color in her cheeks to make her look like she was healthy. And I go into in the book. And so miraculously, they both lived. And my dad did a lot of work on the outside of the ghetto. And my mother was responsible for doing some of the cleaning in the barracks that the Nazis took over in the ghetto. So those were the two main, what distinguished the Kovna ghetto. Out of 33,000 residents in the ghetto, around 3,000 lived. So getting back to what happened. So my parents, in July of 1944, and again, as I mentioned, this is only 3 months after Rose was taken out of my mother's arms, that they were being moved into separate concentration camps. And when they were hustled into the train platform to be put onto the boxcars, my parents made the vow, and that's where the book comes from, The Vow, A Love Story in the Holocaust. It was on that train platform in 1944, in July, that they said that if either one were to live, they were to go back to the town where they first met 5 years earlier, which was in Kaunas, Lithuania. So my father was put onto boxcars that was going to the Dachau concentration camp. The men and the boys were going to the concentration camp in Dachau, where the girls and the women were heading for the Stutthof concentration camp in northern Poland, about 26 miles from the Baltic Sea. 9 months they were apart. What happened in those camps was beyond belief. My dad was responsible for taking the bodies off the electrical fences in the Dachau camp because he was an electrician. He then had to take the bodies, put them onto wheelbarrows and wheel them into the crematorium where they burned the bodies. The people that were trying to escape or trying to commit suicide were the victims that ended up on the wires. And so you can imagine the experiences. And plus the fact there was one part where my dad was going to be shot with 50 other Jews and was at the last minute taken out of line because they wanted him to live because of his electrical background as an electrician. My mom, on the other hand, was in the Stutthof concentration camp, and she also worked digging anti-tank ditches and on the roads, digging roads. She had a very, very tough situation over there too. Now, I will tell you, the living conditions there were horrible. When you first arrived at these camps, especially in Dachau, you were put into the showers, and some lived and some didn't. They were gassed. I'm not going to go into that here, but I go into a little bit in the book. I didn't want to focus on the horrors that both my parents went through. And it was something that is very, very difficult to grasp, especially if it comes from your own family. The picture here is the outside of the Dachau concentration camp. This is already in 1945 when Eisenhower liberated the Dachau concentration camp. And again, I want to remind you that my parents did not know for 9 months if the other one was still alive. And you could imagine here they lost their daughter and now they're afraid that they're never going to see their spouse again.
Michael, how much more time do you need? I'm going to need you to wrap.
Okay, let me wrap up. Okay, so this is a picture of the survivors that got through the concentration camp in Dachau. This is a death march that they marched them to the Baltic. And my mother and father lived miraculously. It was an incredible experience. They were almost put into a barge, but that a boat in the Baltic was taking them to Germany. This is Eisenhower with the paratroopers before D-Day. This is the Normandy invasion in 1944. Here's an iconic photograph of the liberation of the Dachau camp. This is the mission. My father traveled through 3 different countries looking for my mother. This is Eisenhower at one of the schools my mother taught at. My mother's the far right, and those are the children, the children of Holocaust survivors, and she opened the camp to teach the children. Dwight D. Eisenhower is in the first, is left 3 down from the right. My brother's in his baby carriage. They honored my mother at the displacement camp for the school that she opened. And that is Sarah and my mom. That is me at the bottom, my parents and my brother's bar mitzvah. That's my parents in 1946 and my parents in 79, I'm sorry. And that's it. Okay,
Michael,
Jeffrey.
if you could stop the screen share, I'd appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, hit the red stop screen share.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Michael, this was a very, very powerful presentation. The photos, the research. You also are the first person to present the history of Lithuania and the Holocaust of all of the programs that I did. So I am honored for you to bring this history to our audience and to our streaming audience. So thank you very much for a terrific presentation.
Thank you.
We'll have questions at the end. I'm going to now move along, and I want to speak a little bit about what I have experienced since 10/7. I was on a San Diego where I was living at the time in October 7th, and I was on a social coffee Zoom meeting. And all of a sudden, my phone started to blow up. My voicemails blew up. I had Zoom requests, and I just looking at my phone, I had no idea what was going on because I wasn't focused on the news. As soon as the coffee group was finished, I decided that, what's going on? I tried to really understand what was happening, and I started to listen to messages. And I had survivors from around the world calling me and asking to meet with me on Zoom. And I then turned on the TV, saw the news, and I, just like everyone else, I was just shocked. On that Sunday, that was Saturday, and on that Sunday, I realized that I was getting calls from second gens, same issue. Echoes of the Holocaust. The survivors were concerned that they were thinking they would never see another Holocaust in their lives again. Second gens were feeling the echoes. You talked about, Anna, the intergenerational trauma. It was coming so fierce to our second generation community. And that Sunday, I got off all these calls and I just didn't know what to do. I have a powerful voice here with so many people. Should I be passive? Should I just do nothing? But that's not me. So on Monday, I called a couple of friends who are psychologists, and I told them the stories of what I was experiencing, and they immediately signed on, and we had our first trauma havara on that Tuesday, on 10/10. And it was attended by over 100 people. And now every month we do a trauma havara, support havara, for people who are watching the news, suffering from trauma, feeling the echoes of the Holocaust, our friends in Israel. And so I'm very proud of the Havurah that we're doing. And it really made sense to me that but something changed in January. In January, all of a sudden, the world flipped, where we had some passion, compassion. In October and November, everything changed. You heard River to the Sea, you heard colonialism, you started to see demonstrations all over the world. And again, I started to get calls. And in one Havurah, I was challenged. What should I do? Because I'm a tech guy, I know what to do on certain things. And so I created another group, which I would hope all of you would join, is what they call the Stop Hate group, or the One Revolution group. There's a Facebook group. All you have to do is look up One Revolution. I put the group's link in the chat. Help me help others deal with what we're feeling in Israel. And during that time, I changed the name of our group to Jewish Culture and Holocaust Remembrance 10-7 Remembrance. And so I'm dedicating the next song, and I hope some of your prayers, for our sisters and brothers in Israel, the IDF, and innocents in Gaza who are suffering tremendously as well. So I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to play the next video. Please send and think about prayers for those who are in need of healing.
Hashkivenu Adonai
And those of you who are interested, that was the cantors from Central Synagogue in New York. I want to now bring us to our closing speaker, Louise Fein, who has her interesting book to share with us. Louise, unmute yourself, and then we can hear from you. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Lovely to meet you all. My name is Louise Fein. I am going to share, I've forgotten how to do it now, share my screen as well. And sorry, while I just try and do this. Share. Okay, so my name is Louise Fein, and I am very much related to what Anna and the last speaker talked about in terms of second generation trauma. My father came from Leipzig, and his family came to the USA and to England during the 30s. Not everyone got out, but my father was one of the lucky ones and came quite early. I'm actually the product of a second marriage. So his first wife came with him, and she was heavily pregnant when they left Germany with their first child. They had 2 other children as well. And then sadly, his first wife died, and he married my mother, who was very much younger than him. And so he was actually 61 when I was born. So by the time I was born, and he was living with an English woman, he very much did not talk about anything that had happened. He refused to have anything German in the house. My mother asked him to speak German to my sister and I, and he wouldn't do it. He died when I was 17, so I felt that I never had a chance to talk to him about his past, his experiences, and that of the family. And it sort of lay dormant in me for many years. Well, I just sort of got on with life, but I used to have nightmares about Nazis coming for me. I used to just constantly plan how to get out, how to get my family out. And I hadn't heard of this sort of trauma until much, much later when I started researching for this novel. So I totally relate to what the previous speakers were talking about, even though, of course, I never suffered at all. And I didn't know about what other people had, I mean, apart from learning it through school, etc., about what my family had been through, or my father's family, I should say. And I think it's quite a common thing that people like to explore the past and previous traumas through literature. It's a way of expressing and sharing with the rest of the world in a way, perhaps through fiction, through a very personal lens, as opposed to learning it through perhaps dry facts and numbers, which, to be honest, some of the numbers are just incomprehensible. Obviously, the last speaker was so, I mean, that was traumatic and very, very moving. But some of those numbers are so hard to picture. And I think, especially for the younger generation, it's fiction can pull people in who may not otherwise explore this time, which, as we all know, is so important that we don't forget. So I had the idea for a novel for years and years, really, before I started writing. And so I came to writing quite late in life. I had 3 children. I was working as a lawyer and then in banking. And I had my own business for a while, so there really wasn't time for writing. But then my youngest child got very, very sick when she was little, and I had to give up work to take care of her. And in fact, what happened to her inspired my second novel, which I'll talk a little bit about as well. As I said, my father, who's pictured there, oh, sorry, I don't know if you can see my my arrow, but he's
Yes, we can.
Okay. So he was born in 1906 and was brought up in Leipzig. His family originally came from Brody, which is now in the Ukraine, and they traded furs and they traveled regularly to Leipzig, where they, since the medieval times, there were big markets for fairs twice a year. And in the 1930s, some of the family moved to Germany, and then in 1970, when Jewish people could take up German citizenship, they did, and they settled in Leipzig and became fully integrated into German society. So my father, although he was Jewish, he had many friends who were Germans, and he saw himself completely as German as much as being Jewish. So I think what happened, obviously, for many people was they just hoped it would pass. And I'll come on to that in a little while, but it really resonated when I was doing my research, that people always have an optimistic outlook, which is great, but as we know with retrospect, that's not always wise. The lower picture there is my father with me and my older sister there. So since I wrote my debut novel about my father's family in Leipzig, I've written 2 other books as well, and my third book has just been published in January this year. So a little bit about the books. This Daughter of the Reich is my debut novel, which, as I say, it lived in my head for about 10 years before I took a master's degree in creative writing, and I started working on the novel during that. It took me another 5 years of research and traveling to Leipzig and rewriting and rewriting before I got a publishing deal. The book's called People Like Us in the UK edition. And it's, when I started writing this book, I started writing it from the Jewish perspective, but the more I researched and the more I wrote, I wanted to try and understand what a civilized nation could in such a short period of time be brainwashed into the horrific events that became the Holocaust. And in the end, I realized that the most powerful way to tell the story was to tell it from the perspective of a young girl who is brainwashed into Nazism. And it is essentially a love story between this girl and a Jewish boy who eventually, obviously, she comes to see things from the other side. It was very difficult, as I'm sure you can imagine, to live inside the head of a Nazi for a long period of time. But I think it served the purpose, and I felt I needed to do it. I'll talk about it a bit more in a little while. But the research for my first novel then led me to my second novel, which is called The Hidden Child. And this book really is about the origins of the eugenics movement. I was slightly horrified to find when I did my research that eugenics, which fed this whole Nazi idea of the Aryan race being superior, came from England and very much from America. And in fact, a lot of the legislation that was put in place in Germany in the 1930s was almost lifted word for word from certain legislation in the States, where there was mass sterilization programs and you know, putting people in institutions, particularly people who had disabilities. My youngest daughter, who I mentioned was very poorly when she was little, she had a very severe form of epilepsy. And obviously, had she been born 100 years before, she would have definitely ended up in an institution. And if the Nazis had been around, she would have also been terminated, if not for her Jewish heritage, for her epilepsy. And I was very, very surprised about how prevalent it was. And I think it's a history that's been brushed under the carpet in America and in the UK. And I felt this needed to sort of be brought out a bit into the light. So that was the subject of my second novel. And my third novel is unrelated to the subject, so I shan't talk about it now. But that novel's just been published and I'm working on a fourth at the moment. So I just thought I would talk a little bit about the novel and the starting points. And if anyone here is thinking about writing anything inspired by their own family, what helped me get going with it. So as I said, I had this nub of an idea for about 10 years, and I felt that I really was out of touch with that side of my family. Obviously, I'd lost my father. I had never had a chance to talk to him about it. I was not really in touch with my half siblings, who were quite a lot older than me, and obviously they had a different mother. They were very much the Jewish side of the family, and because my mother is not Jewish, I wasn't, and I felt neither one thing or the other. I didn't really feel like I belonged anywhere. And I think I had a lot of issues with my identity. Who was I? Where did I come from? And I suppose this just went on inside me for quite a long time, subconsciously. And I felt the best way in the end to explore it was through a novel. And because I did not know enough about the family history, I decided that it had to be fiction. In fact, not only did it, you know, help me to understand that side of my heritage, but it also brought me very much closer to my half sister, who was absolutely amazing. When I told her I was writing this novel, bizarrely at the same time she decided to write a family history. And so we decided to research our books together. And we now have this amazing relationship, all because of the book, which I'm so grateful for. We went together to Leipzig. As I say, my father wouldn't speak to me in German, but my half sister learnt German, and so she helped me immensely. While we were there, we met with a load of experts. We walked the streets. My father lived in an area of Leipzig called Gohlis, and we visited his house where he lived. This is the White House here. It was just a flat, actually, in that building's quite big. And we went to the Jewish cemetery, where there's a big memorial to the family. And we walked through a street called the Brool, which is where they had their business. They had a lot of property in the city, which was all taken away from them. My father actually trained as a lawyer, and he became qualified in 1932. And in 1933, he was on one of Hitler's early lists of people who could no longer practice law. So he tried to find a job elsewhere in Europe, which he was unable to do. And in the end, he came to England as a refugee, and he started up the fur business, the family fur business in London. But the story itself, I felt, wasn't really enough for a novel. So the story in the book Daughter of the Reich is a fictional story, but it is, I felt a great responsibility to get everything right. You know, I question myself a lot, what right do I have to write about this? And in the end, I decided that I have as much right as anyone else, because my father, you know, suffered through this, and but I felt this great responsibility. So I did so much research, and I read Mein Kampf. I read very, very widely. I wanted to really focus on contemporaneous material for the story, which is all set amongst true events, and because I wanted to understand how people felt at the time. So apart from all the general reading that I did, and through that came the emergence of the ideas and the characters and the themes, I was very lucky in that my half brother actually produced about 12 boxes of family letters, diaries, journals, like literally school exercise books from the 1910s all the way up to the 1960s, when the family was trying to get some reparation for the stolen property and for various relatives who had been taken to Buchenwald and never returned. And these were incredibly helpful to me. And the fact that at the time, people were, as I said earlier, just really like talking to each other about how terrible things were, and but that they hoped it would pass. And that was quite revelatory to me. And at the time I was writing this book, we had, you know, Trump being elected, we had Brexit, we had all this nationalist feeling sort of coming to the fore, anti-Semitism on the rise, and it just felt very very real, and I felt that the more we do to sort of keep reminding ourselves that we mustn't take things for granted, that somehow things are just going to suddenly get better, is so important. The letter that is here on the right hand side is a letter that my father's lawyer sent to the Home Office, which was something he had to do every single year from 1933 when he came to England until 1946 when he was finally granted a right to stay in the country, because he was a refugee. He had to prove that he could support his family via the business that he had set up, and every year he had to prove that in order to stay in the country. So yeah, I mean, contemporaneous accounts and primary sources were absolutely vital for me writing my novel, as was visiting Leipzig, which I did several times. And in fact, I did so much research that the vast majority hasn't made it into the book. But I am hopeful that it's infused into the writing, and the fact that it's I'm hoping, and I'm sure it feels very real. I've been very lucky with this book. It's been quite a successful novel. It's been translated into 12 different languages. And I have had letters from people all over the world telling me how it's resonated with them. Even from, it's been translated into Russian, and lots of the Russian people have written to me saying, you know, how they hope that we don't see Russians by Putin, that they hate Putin, and how the book has resonated in that sense, which has been, yeah, I mean, it's just also relevant in so many places today. In terms of the research and the writing, if you are writing a book, it's so easy to sort of disappear down rabbit holes of research, which actually is very, very interesting, but it's really important to stick with the story and remember that the story and the characters are the most important thing for your readers. And so when you're doing your research, it's very tempting to sort of dump it all into the story. But as a reader, that's probably the least interesting thing, unless, of course, it's nonfiction, which is a different thing. But as I say, it should be, once you've done your research, set it aside and write the story. I found that when I was doing my later drafts and I knew which parts of the story were going to stay in the book, then I could really drill down and go into a lot of detail. And sometimes, you know, for one paragraph, it might take me 3 days to research that particular aspect of the story. And I mean, there were very difficult parts to the writing of the novel. Seeing my father's home, visiting Buchenwald, seeing these pictures of the crematorium. Buchenwald, by the way, is in Germany, not far from Leipzig, and it was a concentration camp, not a death camp, but a lot of people were killed there, and as you may know, they were taken there to other death camps. So a lot of my family started off in Buchenwald and then they ended up in Auschwitz. So it was pretty poignant going to see that place. And in the camp, they had a special area just for the Jewish people, and it was called the Little Camp, and it was much, much worse than the other parts of the camp. I mean, all of it was awful, but it was the worst place to be, which was the whole, I felt that the atmosphere of the camp was just, yeah, it was infused into the air how awful it was. Also, when I was writing my second novel, I had to face up to my sort of daughter's horrendous illness, and I did a lot of research for that novel, and I visited what was an epilepsy colony, and is now a sort of school for children with severe epilepsy. But they opened their archives for me, and reading the case notes from asylums and epilepsy colonies and the general attitude at the time to people with disability was really grueling and horrendous. And yeah, it was, I suppose, because of course I thought of my daughter, who would have been in that situation, was really quite traumatic. But again, I felt it was a therapeutic thing for me to write this novel, which I couldn't have done at the time when she was very ill, but now she's a teenager and much, much healthier. And so I was able to sort of face up to that. In terms of the second novel, the story is basically set in England in the 1920s, the late 1920s, and America. And it's about it's again based around real people and events, and it is the story of a couple who are rising up in society, and they're very prominent eugenicists. Many people were, and they have a child who is not quite perfect, and they basically put her in a colony, and then it's sort of what happens to the family after that. So that's the second story. Yeah, as I said, historical fiction, it is fiction, but I think it has a power which some non-fiction perhaps doesn't always have, because it can reach an audience who may not otherwise read this sort of book. So I think it has its place. Of course, non-fiction and memoirs and all those are just as important, if not more so. But I think it's really important for the Holocaust to be as widely read as possible, and their historical fiction has its place. In terms of the writing, I think it's the challenge is always to reach that sweet spot between how much historical detail is put in there for authenticity, but not having too much. And that often takes several drafts before you reach that correct balance. I also feel that if you're writing historical fiction, it's really important to do all the research to make it as historically accurate as possible, because you almost have a duty, I feel, to history not to, invent things. But where you can use your imagination is filling in the missing detail or fleshing out the characters, really bringing the whole period to life. And I hope that I've achieved that in my books. And for me personally, it's been a real journey to explore the past, to understand that side of my background, and to learn who I am in a way that if I had not written this novel, I don't think I would have done. And whether I would have continued having those dreams, I don't know. But I think it's helped me to come to terms with everything. And in terms of being sort of coming full circle, I have taken up German citizenship, which I was able to do under a special program from the German government, where if you had a parent who had their citizenship taken away from them, then you can apply to have German citizenship, which for me, not so much important, but I wanted it for my children, especially with Brexit. And I sort of felt that was in some way compensation. I mean, not really, but a little bit. And most importantly, it's given me an incredible relationship with my half sister, which I would never have had without that. So if you're interested in finding out any more about me or my books, I have a website, and I'm also on social media. I'm always really happy to chat with readers and to answer any questions, etc. So that's where to find me if you're at all interested. So that's the end of my presentation. I've no idea how much time I have left.
Okay. If you could end there we go. Thank you. Well, I really appreciate it. And what you brought to the group is something that is also a first, sort of a successful multiple titled author's how-to. And we've never had an author or a presenter do that quite like you've done. So that's terrific. And we have a lot of authors in the community. And we also have a lot of authors who are working in process, bringing their own stories forward. So I think this program will be very helpful. to them and for you to offer a resource to them, which is terrific. And so I'm going to transition now, and I'm going to put everyone on screen. If there are any questions, again, those of you who are not on camera, we'd love to see you. You're not there because you haven't enabled your cameras to be on. So if you would put them on, it would be great. We have a number of people in the audience. So are there any questions from people who are on camera for our audience, for our speakers? And if there are, please raise your hand because I can see you all in front of me. Oh, okay, there are. It doesn't seem to be. So I'm going to ask each of you a question that pertains to your family. And each of you are second generation. And I want to know what was the sort of executive summary or the high point of living in a survivor family. I'll start with you, Michael. If you can share what you remember to be a high point of living in a second generation family.
Boy, what a question that is. I could tell you that my parents, it was not easy. Let me put that, when you're asking me for a high point, they loved me very much, but the way they loved me was not exactly what I consider to be a normal way. They were very, very smothering, very controlling. My mother would walk me home from school every day when I was 5, 6, 7 years old. So, but I mean, that was the way they loved me. They wanted to protect me, but I think they overdid it. But you got to keep remembering my sister was taken out of from my mother. So they were very, very cautious about the children, and they really were very hovering. They gave me piano lessons when I was 5 years old. There's a good one. I was in I guess you could say, a duet with my brother at the age of 7. They always stressed education and getting more culture into the family. So I would say the piano lessons, and I guess they were very giving people, but it was kind of transactional in the sense that I had to be a good little Jewish boy. They wanted me to go to yeshiva, and I was a little bit on the rebellious side, so it caused a little friction between the folks.
Okay, and Anna,
So,
how would you answer that question? If you're muted, unmute yourself.
Well, similarly like Michael, it's I'm an only child, and there was no wider family at all. There was no one. And somehow it was like almost a responsibility, which was all unconscious, that you have to make them happy, the parents, and that you have to somehow account for, you had to, you were supposed to live for everyone, and you were supposed to bring constant happiness somehow. And to be sad wasn't really, you couldn't justify it because, as I said, nothing much happened to me. And so it was very difficult to, and it led to, it was terribly difficult to separate. And I think many people from second generation find it very difficult to separate and to become individuals in their own right, because there is this debt that you have to somehow, you have to make up for everyone else who is dead. And this is a very heavy burden. And the thing for me, it was that all of it was unconscious. I never understood it like I can now articulate it, but I couldn't articulate it, of course, for a long time, till I was in my midlife in a way. I couldn't articulate what those feelings were, this kind of responsibility. So I moved to England, and that somehow didn't do the separation really, because the separation is internal. So the channel didn't provide the separation, the fact that, the geographical distance, it's not about that. Anyway, yeah.
Louise, now I want to ask you, I'm glad that you brought up that your daughter is a teenager and she's in better health. So we were all thinking while you were speaking, we were not sure what the status of your daughter was. So I'm asking you if you're willing to share, is your daughter doing well and thriving, or?
Thank you for asking. Yes, no, I mean, she was very, very ill. So she was having 100 seizures a day, every single day. And it was intractable epilepsy. It was untreatable. And she suffered very severe such severe brain damage. They said she would never lead an independent life and she would always need care. But she is now 17. She's at a normal school. She is just about to take her GCSEs. She won't do very well. She's not very academic, but she will 100% lead an independent life, and she's exceeded every expectation that the doctors had for her when she was small. So that's a happy story.
Oh, beautiful. And how would you answer your growing up in a second generation home?
So I would answer that, and I've had a little bit more time to think about it than the others, but I would say that I think what my father taught me was to value liberty and freedom over everything else, and not to worry about possessions or things. That people and family are the most important things in your life, and that's all that matters. So don't get too attached to possessions or things, because ultimately they don't matter. And I think that I've tried to pass that down to my children as well.
Okay, so you've indicated that you have children. Anna, do you have children? Okay, and Michael, do you have children? No.
No, no,
Do you have a spouse?
not me. No,
Okay.
nobody got married.
Okay, so I'll leave you out of this question. So I'll ask the two ladies, what was it like when you came home with your soon-to-be fiance to your second generation's parents?
No.
And how did they process that? Did they accept them? Was it a challenge?
I'll go first, because my father never lived that long. So I was only 17 when he died. So he didn't.
What about your mother?
My mother, well, she wasn't a survivor, so it was kind of a different situation, but all she cared about was that he was a nice person, and that he would treat me well. That's all that mattered to her.
And Anna, if I could be so bold to ask you the same question. Yeah, unmute yourself. I can't hear you. You shouldn't take yourself off to mute. We're all.
Well, I have taken myself off because my husband is calling me for a dinner. So I didn't want you to hear him. Yeah, I wouldn't know what to say, really. I don't know what to say to that.
Okay. So I got to ask you, Michael, as any Jewish parent, and I have my parents who were survivors had postdoctorate degrees in Jewish guilt. So
Yeah.
I'm sure that they had something to say about what's the timing of, what's going on with you. So again, I'll be so bold to ask you that question and hear what your parents said about you not having a spouse.
What made it even worse, I never had children. That was what she wanted. My mother, she told me that if I had a child, she fulfilled her obligation as a mother, and God could take her to heaven right after I had the baby. She didn't care. I was 2 weeks away from my wedding, and I broke the wedding. 2 weeks away, we had over 400 people coming to the Plaza Hotel in New York. Everybody had to be called back to say the wedding was canceled. My mother almost flipped out. I thought she was going to have a heart attack. She had to call my fiance back and said, he's going to get married. I had to go back into New York, and I had to break up with her twice in the same day.
Now, you would never know that about Michael if I didn't ask these silly questions,
It was like a Steinfeld movie. But it was incredible. I mean, every day, when they were in Florida, every day I'd call her, we would talk, and she goes, well, did you find someone? That's the first thing out of her mouth every time I picked up the phone. And if I didn't date someone Jewish, she went off the wall.
Well, I'm going to open this up to my friends here, Gabi and Mark and Sammy and Eva, and also, hold on one second. And Melina, if I'm saying that correctly, I would want you to contribute to the same question. What was it like to grow up in a survivor home? And and Sammy's actually a survivor, so we're going to go to Sammy. Raises his hand, he gets the first call. So go ahead. You have to unmute yourself, Sammy, please. And I hope we didn't lose Gabby over that question. She just disappeared.
Hi, everybody. I am not only a survivor, but I'm also a child of Holocaust survivors. And obviously, every survivor reacted differently through the trauma that they went. But I have a couple of stories that I can tell, which is funny, which I related to Michael. The interesting thing is when I came to the United States, my parents lived in Israel. I came by myself.
And you're now in New York, right?
I live in New York. And well, at that time, I lived in Wisconsin, in Milwaukee. But interestingly enough, when I called my parents, my mother never said hello, never asked me how I am. The first question, "Nu." So I said, "Nu." So my mother, "Nu." So I said, "Mother, when it will happen, you will be the first one to know." Okay. The other thing is also, for instance, with my parents, especially my father. My father was an orphan of both of his parents. And for him, my success was his success. And a lot of survivors felt that way. They lived through their children. As a matter of fact, when I decided to get divorced the second time, my fight was not with my ex. My fight was with my father. He said, "You are all set. You have a house, you have a car, you have everything. You're successful. Why would you want to get divorced?" Okay, so it's an interesting process. And at the same time, uh, we were also, as children, we were taught to be very stoic, not to show pain, not to cry. I was subjected to medical experiments. I've been in pain all my life, every second. I will be in pain for the rest of my life. But the interesting part is I was not allowed to show, okay, the pain. Even the doctors did not believe me because they couldn't see on my face the pain that I was going through. I was not allowed to cry, not allowed to complain. Okay, I remember, for instance, hitting a child in school was against the norms. And one day a teacher hit me because I said I cannot reach my toes without bending my knees. So the teacher came with a little rod, okay, and gave me a good hit, and I did reach my toes without bending my knees. So I went to my father, and I told him that she hit me. So my father, instead of taking my side, my father took the teacher's side. He said, "Good for her." So it's a different atmosphere, different attitude, but they cared, like Michael said, they cared for us, but through the trauma that they went through, it was a different caring what we know today or how we feel today.
Yeah.
Okay. I want to kind of wrap up our session here in two ways. I want to invite you all to look at the chat. We have another second and third part of the Yom HaShoah program on April 21st, on April 28th. The links are in the chat, so I hope that you all sign up and we'll see you again. I also want to unfortunately tell you some sad news. Natan Diamet, who's a friend of our community, has done programs, recently passed. And he was a good friend, a Holocaust survivor. His story is on our YouTube channel, and he used to be the chair of the Tel Aviv Yad Vashem of the Righteous Committee, and his loss will be missed, and may his memory be a blessing. I want to end the program with another video, and it's again dedicated to our friends our brothers and sisters in Israel, our brothers and sisters around the world, the IDF who are brave and are fighting for the Jewish people, that's us. And also we want to make sure that we take the world as one view in what we do. So let me put the last song on. I'm going to immediately end the program. Hopefully you'll stay with us, but I want to record this for our streaming audience.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We'll see you on the 21st for our next program. Love you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you.